In this structure, credit, presented as a pure element called currency, has the appearance of capital, but is in fact negative capital. Hence, it has the appearance of service, but is in fact indebtedness or debt. It is therefore an economic inductance instead of an economic capacitance, and if balanced in no other way, will be balanced by the negation of population, war, genocide.
Mm-hmm.
The total goods and services represent real capital called the gross national product.
Mm-hmm.
And currency may be printed up to this level and still represent economic capacitance.
Mm-hmm.
But currency printed beyond this level is subtractive, represents the introduction of economic inductance, and constitutes notes of indebtedness. War is therefore the balancing of the system by killing the true creditors, the public, which we have taught to exchange true value for inflated currency, and
Wow.
falling back on whatever is left of the resources of nature and regeneration of those resources. Mr. Rothschild had discovered that currency gave him the power to rearrange the economic structure to his own advantage, to shift economic inductance to those economic positions which would encourage the greatest economic instability and oscillation. The final key to economic control had to wait until there was sufficient data and high-speed computing equipment to keep close watch on the economic oscillations created by price shocking and excess paper energy credits, paper inductance inflation. Breakthrough. The aviation field provided the greatest evolution in economic engineering by way of the mathematical theory of shock testing. In this process, a projectile is fired from an airframe on the ground, and the impulse of the recoil is monitored by vibration transducers connected to the airframe and wired to chart recorders. By studying the echoes or reflections of the recoil impulse in the airframe, it is possible to discover critical vibrations in the structure of the airframe, which either vibrations of the engine or alcolian vibrations of the wings. I don't know if that's aeolian or icolian. Or a combination of the two might reinforce, resulting in resonant self-destruction of the airframe in flight as an aircraft. From the standpoint of engineering, this means that the strengths and weaknesses of the structure of the airframe in terms of vibrational energy can be discovered and manipulated. Application in economics. To use this method of airframe shock testing in economic engineering, the prices of commodities are shocked, and the public consumer reaction is monitored.
Mm-hmm.
The resulting echoes of the economic shock are interpreted theoretically by computers, and the psychoeconomic structure of the economy is thus discovered. It is by this process that partial, differential, and difference matrices are discovered that define the family household and make possible its evaluation as an economic industry.
Wow.
Then
These guys got it down to a science. Sorry. They really do. Keep going.
Well, they've had a lot of time to perfect their craft.
They have. I mean, they've got this down to a science. The bottom line is, and you'll keep reading, but what astounds me is that what Rothschild essentially discovered was the peaks, the heights, and the valleys, the crests and the troughs, right? And to find that cycle, when to know to, create money, whatever, get credit out there, and know when to pull it back. And then they use some of the macro, happenings, right, to restrict things, to pull it back, such as, maybe a tough job market, going to the most extreme war, what they said earlier, right? Going to war and then killing off, essentially X amount of people to kind of prune the tree, right?
Well, what this has said so far is people are people. From 2,000 years ago to 1,000 years ago to today. People are people. They run their lives with their emotions on their sleeve, most of them. Okay?
Okay, well.
But what this has said is where they've really started to hone in on this is with the advent of the computer. They can now computerize all of this.
Exactly.
And now they take all emotion out of it 100%. Now the computer just rationalizes everything. And that's why we're dead in the water. We're not going to eat them.
Well, to your point, you don't even have to say the emotion part. I mean, that's a given. But to add to what you're saying with the computer, it makes things so much more precise and profound, and then it adds to the timing factor. Timing's everything, as you know.
Yeah, it's so much faster.
With that precision. So they've perfected it, like you said.
Yeah, because computers today now can think as quickly as a human being now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would think.
With those IBM chess games.
Yes. Yeah, the IBM Watson, wasn't it Watson that defeated
yeah, and that was like 15 years ago.
Yeah, defeated the best chess player in the world. So, you know, our thought process and patterns our brains are electrical, and they have wiring, right, that goes in various directions. And electrical impulses called synapses fire, right? So, and we're either constantly growing those things, like by reading and expanding our learning process, or we're shrinking. But in general, speed of thought, to your point, Dave, I believe is at synapse speed. On top of doing that, what you're inferencing as well, Dave, I think, is being able to think, logically deduct like you and I, and make a decision, right?
Well, that's actually pretty easy for a computer, you know. Well, and as it gains experience, it becomes pretty darn good.
Well, the most rudimentary programs, and I've done programming in the past, I haven't done it in 15, 20 years. The most rudimentary is the if-then statement, right? If this, then that, okay? But now they're at a point now with AI where AI is, if it's not already there, it's getting damn close, where it's able to think and logically deduct and essentially learn, right? So what do you and I do? You know, we make mistakes at first and we learn, you know, and then going forward, we have more of a
Dan,
data.
What do you think this Alexa is? And all these other type things.
It's totally agree.
An opportunity for that thing to learn.
Yes, you got it. 100%. Couldn't agree more.
Do you notice now that when you start typing in stuff to Google, it already knows what you're thinking before you can even finish your sentence?
Yeah. Some people call that progress.
Well, here's the scary thing and you can see it now because they bring out these damn robots that do the Olympic routines. All they have to do is put that into something that has mobility, and they're talking robots or the pigs with the chip in the brain, but they're really talking about making us part robot is what they're trying to do.
No doubt about it. I've said for years that what you're going to see is, and we'll see it in our lifetime, in my opinion.
It's already here.
No, but I
see people with robotics, a $6 million man.
Well, not quite. You don't see it quite mainstream yet, but we're going to see it soon. We're going to see a couple things mainstream, I think. Before
that guy in New Hampshire that I brought up a couple months ago, that's the guy you really got to keep an eye on.
All right. Okay. So what I'm going to say is, we're going to see in our lifetime, in my opinion, androids walking down the street, fully functional, capable, don't need any human intervention, can just walk, talk, think, do whatever. And then you're also going to see, to your point, eventually, you know, we're not silicone based. We're obviously carbon based beings, but you're going to see a combination of silicone, aka computer based, and human based beings. You're going to see that too. That's coming. Absolutely.
It's already here. Maybe it's not mainstream yet, but
it's not mainstream, but yeah, I mean, you might have a thing where if somebody dies, for example, they lose all their appendages, and all they got left, for example, is essentially from their lungs and their heart up to their head. They have no arms, no legs, no torso, and they could take that and put that in an exoskeleton cavity, which they're working on now, and have a body just like you and I. The only difference is, it's not flesh based, right? It's made out of,
They
carb.
have that now.
Yeah, but it's not mainstream, and they'll
Define
have
mainstream. How many people need that? There are several dozen people in the world who are using that type of technology right now.
But it's not mainstream. What does mainstream mean? Use your common sense. You're walking down the street, you see it every day.
Well, God help us if mainstream, that many people need that technology, Dan. I'm going to choose my own legs as long as I have them. I'm not going to choose to go into, like, you see those people who they're on those coils, and they want to run in the Olympics on those coils.
Yeah.
And they get disallowed. I mean, is somebody going to choose to have their legs chopped off to put those on? I don't think so.
Yes, some people will eventually. Yes, 100%. Yeah,
No,
if it makes them, if it makes them bigger, faster, and stronger, yeah. And if it feels like your regular appendage and gives you that much more speed and strength, yes, there'll be people that'll do that eventually. You and I can't imagine doing it.
Be very careful, folks, because it's like the women who went to get the big boobs, and they found out years later that that's why they were getting breast cancer.
Yeah, I mean, hey,
because it was leaking, and that silicone wasn't really a good match with your body, and it was causing an irritation, and it killed you.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. We're doing all kinds of things, and we're going to continue to do this. The horse is out of the barn. You know this. Let's finish reading. But suffice to say, the horse is out of the barn. They're going to keep doing unnatural things. You know that. They're not going to stop, Dave. They're not going to stop. What do you think? They're going to let the Bible and God stop them? Most people are laughing at that. It's not going to stop. It's going to proliferate.
Yep. Then the response of the household to future shocks can be predicted and manipulated, and the society becomes a well-regulated animal with its reins under the control of a sophisticated computer-regulated social energy bookkeeping system. Mm-hmm. Eventually, every individual element of the structure comes under computer control through a knowledge of personal preferences.
Absolutely.
Such knowledge guaranteed by computer association of consumer preferences with identified consumers, identified via association with the use of a credit card, and later a permanent tattooed body number, invisible under normal ambient illumination.
Sound familiar, folks, with what's coming?
I don't know.
We're
the
going
economic
to
model, the Harvard Economics Research Project.
Good old
Harvard. An extension of World War II operations research. Its purpose was to discover the science of controlling an economy. At first, the American economy, and then the world economy.
It was New World Order, baby.
Damn, we're never going to get through this.
Keep going.
It was felt that with sufficient mathematical foundation and data, it would be nearly as easy to predict and control the trend of an economy as to predict and control the trajectory of a projectile. Such has proven to be the case. Moreover, the economy has been transformed into a guided missile on target. The immediate aim of the Harvard Project was to discover the economic structure, what forces change the structure, how the behavior of the structure can be predicted, and how it can be manipulated. What was needed was a well-organized knowledge of the mathematical structures and interrelationships of investment, production, distribution, and consumption. To make a short story of it all, it was discovered that an economy obeyed the same laws as electricity, and that all of the mathematical theory and practical and computer know-how developed for the electronic field could be directly applied in the study of economics. This discovery was not openly declared, and its more subtle implications were and are kept a closely guarded secret. For example, that in an economic model, human life is measured in dollars, and that the electric spark generated when opening a switch connected to an active inductor is mathematically analogous to the initiation of a war. The greatest hurdle which theoretical economists faced was the accurate description of the household as an industry. This is a challenge because consumer purchases are a matter of choice, which in turn is influenced by income, price, and other economic factors. This hurdle was cleared in an indirect and statistically approximate way by an application of shock testing to determine the current characteristics, called current technical coefficients, of a household industry. Finally, because problems in theoretical economics can be translated very easily into problems in theoretical electronics, and the solution translated back again, it follows that only a book of language translation and concept definition needed to be written for economics. The remainder could be gotten from standard works on mathematics and electronics. This makes the publication of books on advanced economics unnecessary and greatly simplifies project security. Industrial diagrams. An ideal industry is defined as a device which receives the value from other industries in several forms and converts it into one specific product for sales and distribution to other industries. It has several inputs and one output. What the public normally thinks of as one industry is really an industrial complex where several industries under one roof produce one or more products. 3 industrial classes. Industries fall into 3 categories or classes by type of output. Class number 1, capital, resources. Class number 2, goods, commodities, or use.
Dissipative.
Class number 3, services, action of population. Class number 1, industries exist at 3 levels. Number 1, nature, sources of energy and raw materials. 2, government, printing of currency equal to gross national product, GNP, and extension, inflation of currency in excess of GNP. 3, banking, loaning of money for interest and extension, inflation, counterfeiting of economic value through deposit loan accounts. Class number 2 industries exist as producers of tangible or consumer dissipated products. This sort of activity is usually recognized and labeled by the public as an industry. Class number 3 industries are those which have service rather than a tangible product as their output. These industries are called households. And 2, governments. Their output is human activity of a mechanical sort, and their basis is population. Aggregation. The whole economic system can be represented by a 3-industry model if one allows the names of the outputs to be number 1, capital, number 2, goods, and number 3, services. The problem with this representation is that it would not show the influence of, say, the textile industry on the ferrous metal industry. This is because both the textile industry and the ferrous metal industry would be contained within a single classification called the goods industry. And by this process of combining or aggregating these 2 industries onto one system block, they would lose their economic individuality. The E model. A national economy consists of simultaneous flows of production, distribution, consumption, and investment. If all of these elements, including labor and human functions, are assigned a numerical value in like units of measure, say $1939, then this flow can be further represented by a current flow in an electronic circuit, and its behavior can be predicted and manipulated with useful precision. The 3 ideal passive energy components of electronics, the capacitor, the resistor, and the inductor, correspond to the 3 ideal passive energy components of economics called the pure industries of capital, goods, and services, respectively. Economic capacitance represents the storage of capital in one form or another. Economic conductance represents the level of conductance of materials for the production of goods. Economic inductance represents the inertia of economic value in motion. This is a population phenomenon known as services. Economic inductance. An electrical inductor, for example, a coil of wire, has an electric current as its primary phenomenon and a magnetic field as its secondary phenomenon, inertia. Corresponding to this, an economic inductor has a flow of economic value as its primary phenomenon and a population field as its secondary phenomenon of inertia. When the flow of economic value, for example, money, diminishes, the human population field collapses in order to keep the economic value, money, flowing. Extreme case, war. This public inertia is a result of consumer buying habits, expected standard of livings, etc., and is generally a phenomenon of self-preservation. Inductive factors to consider. Number 1, population. Number 2, magnitude of the economic activities of the government. Number 3, the method of financing these government activities. See the Peter Paul principle, inflation of the currency. Translation. A few examples will be given. Charge, coulombs, dollars, 1939. Flow current, amperes, coulombs per second, dollars of flow per year. Motivating force, volts, dollars, output, demand. Conductance, amperes per volt, dollars of flow per year per dollar demand. Capacitance, coulombs per volt, dollars of production inventory stock per dollar demand. Time flow relationships and self-destructive oscillations. An ideal industry may be symbolized electronically in various ways. The simplest way is to represent a demand by a voltage and a supply by a current. When this is done, the relationship between the two becomes what is called an admittance, which can result from 3 economic factors. Number 1, hindsight flow. 2, present flow. And 3, foresight flow. Foresight flow is the result of that property of living entities to cause energy, food, to be stored for a period of low energy, for example, a winter season. It consists of demands made upon an economic system for that period of low energy, the winter season. In a production industry, it takes several forms, one of which is known as production stock or inventory. In electronic symbology, this specific industry demand, a pure capital industry, is represented by capacitance, and the stock or resources represented by a stored charge. Satisfaction of an industry demands suffers a lag because of the loading effect of inventory priorities. Present flow ideally involves no delays. It is, so to speak, input today for output today, a hand-to-mouth flow. In electronic symbology, this specific industry demand, a pure use industry, is represented by a conductance, which is then a simple economic value. Hindsight flow is known as habit or inertia. In electronics, this phenomenon is the characteristic of an inductor. Economic analog equals a pure service industry, in which a current flow, economic analog equals flow of money, creates a magnetic field. Economic analog equals active human population, which if the current, money flow, begins to diminish, collapse, war, to maintain the current flow of money, energy. I'm wondering how many people are going to be lost by this. If you've never, how many people out there know what a resistor is or a capacitor?
Agreed.
10%?
Yeah, I mean, all they got to basically understand is, without getting into the minutia, is that, you know, money and the flow of money is kind of like inductance in the flow of electricity, and that there's certain things that enable the flow of electricity, you know, such as voltage, but then also capacitance in the form of storage, right? I forget resistance, what resistance does, but what is power? Amperage times voltage, right? You know, money is similar to electricity. It flows, it ebbs and flows, right? And that there are certain things that make it ebb and flow. And when money gets to a certain height, the government does certain things to bring it back down. And when it's down, it does certain things, you know, to bring it back up. So it kind of oscillates up and down.
Yeah, the problem is it's no simple, because a resistive load is different from an inductive load, different from a capacitive load. Okay.
Hmm.
So, so
Okay.
this is something that this thing is not getting into. Because if you're talking just a light bulb, that's a resistive load. But if you
Yeah.
start getting into a true electronic circuit, then you could actually have a capacitive load mixed with an inductive load and a resistive load, which will change the way that these things are all measured because it changes the actual waveforms. So
Yeah.
you can see how easily it can get complicated.
Well, right. But he's just trying to make simple analogies from electronics to economics, and that they were able to, through electronics and aeronautics, they were able to take these principles that they kind of discovered and these mathematical principles to represent these principles, I suppose, and then analogously port them, if you will, over to the world of economics. So they were able to take these disciplines and the
Well, physics
preciseness,
is physics.
yeah, and the preciseness of these disciplines, import them to economics, which in turn would allow them to more strenuously sort of monitor and dictate and even determine the flow at times through shock testing, for example, that they do even in marketing and stuff, right? One example of shock testing might be what if you took X amount of, in a region, steak out of the environment? You lessened it by 5%. What impact or bearing would that have on certain types of households in that area, right? So they've been able to perfect this type of stuff. And with the advent of the high-speed computing, to your point, right, they've been able to run simulations
Well,
real quick
here's something that you
and
probably
tweak them.
don't. Here's something you probably don't realize because, and I'm not saying this to offend you. I'm just saying because you don't do this for a living, and most people don't know is when you actually design electronic circuit, like an electrical circuit.
Yeah,
Okay, the really good when you start balancing the cost of it and the efficiency and the performance,
yeah,
the more specific you get, the better it is. But
the more precise. Yeah,
the problem is when you get that specific, it has to operate in that rigid confine. And if it gets outside a very narrow parameter, it falls apart.
yeah. So in basic machinery, in mechanics, in
Very
that type
tight
of,
specifications,
yeah, or tolerance.
very tight tolerance.
It's the tolerance. The term's tolerance.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Most electronic circuits have very, very tight windows.
they do.
Now, that's the challenge that I have always had is when I design something, I'm always like an outside the box guy. When I'm working with Jose or whoever, I'm like, okay, well, I know that this is the parameter, but I want to expand there. And then they're all like, oh my God, I don't think we can do that. And of course, you end up finding a solution, but
Mm-hmm.
usually what happens is you can do almost anything, but now the cost and complexity doubles, triples, quadruples, right?
Well, I was going to say there's a cost for that preciseness and tolerance. There's an
No, no,
associated
no, no.
cost.
There's a savings.
Well, there's a savings, I
Savings.
guess.
No, no. That's what I'm trying to
Well,
explain.
I guess long term, I guess, yeah. Ultimately, there's a savings. I guess you're right. Yeah,
No,
because you're not wasting energy and stuff. Yeah,
what I'm trying to explain to you is when you design this system in electronics, if you
yeah,
design it for this narrow range,
yeah.
that is going to be the most cost effective way to do it. But if you now want to start, and that's where you get into the sine wave. So
Got it.
if you want to capture this now, but if you want to start capturing everything,
Yeah,
then it increases the complexity and cost of your system.
that makes sense. That makes sense.
So now,
Yeah,
what that means for this, who the hell knows? But we'll probably drop this on the scrap floor.
that's
Okay.
okay.
All right. All right. I'll continue reading. But I'm just thinking, as I'm reading this, I'm like, the average person is not going to have a clue what this means. But let's see where it takes us. Other large alternatives to war as economic conductors or economic flywheels are an open-ended social welfare program or an enormous but fruitful open-ended space program. The problem with stabilizing the economic system is that there is too much demand on account of, number one, too much greed, and number two, too much population. This creates excessive economic inductance, which can only be balanced with economic capacitance, true resources or value, for example, in goods or services. The social welfare program is nothing more than an open-ended credit balance system which creates a false capital industry to give non-productive people a roof over their heads and food in their stomachs.
Mm-hmm.
This can be useful, however, because the recipients become state property in return for the gift, a standing army for the elite.
Mm-hmm.
He who pays the piper picks the tune. Those
That's where.
those who get hooked on the economic drug must go to the elite for a fix.
Yep.
In this, the method of introducing large amounts of stabilizing capacitance is by borrowing on the future credit of the world.
Sound familiar? Sounds exactly where we're at, brother. Exactly in America. Keep
this
going.
is the fourth law. Well, Dan,
this is where we're at. To a T.
You don't know that. This was written 30 years ago or longer.
He was 30 years ahead of his time.
This was actually written back in the 60s.
Yeah, this guy was way ahead of his time. Whoever wrote
this. He didn't write this.
No, I know he didn't write this. Whoever constructed this was the plan. This was
what I'm saying is everything's relative. You think that the system is beyond capacity. For all you know, it could go another 100 times what it is now before it becomes stressed out.
Okay, I don't know where it's at in terms of capacity, but there's a lot of parallels here, right? That's all I'm saying with what's going on now. Our whole economy.
What I'm saying is back then they had the same concerns, but back then they were freaking out about $1 billion. Today we're freaking out about 20 trillion or 200 trillion.
Yeah.
Next year in 10 years it might be, 10 quadrillion.
Well, if the devalue of the currency can take us that far, I suppose. I think it'll collapse way before then. But yeah, there's some math.
Why is it going to collapse?
Well, that's a good point.
It hasn't collapsed so far.
Well, my understanding is that the plan is to keep printing money essentially into infinity, and at the same time driving inflation, and that in effect will dissipate the credit. The
hasn't
debt that's
happened
outstanding.
So far. It's been 20 years.
That's the plan. That's the plan.
People around the world are still more than happy to take the U.S. dollar. Dan,
we are not
got to do something about that.
We're not a free market system anymore. Okay, at all. It's total government intervention.
What do you mean anymore? It has never been a free market system since we've been alive. Before we were alive.
No, that's not true.
It is true.
No, it's not true. No, it's not true.
How is it free? How is it not free today?
It changed.
It wasn't free 50 years ago or 100 years ago.
No, it was free 20, 25 years ago. Freer. Okay, now it's not free at all.
No, now I'm asking you.
Okay.
How is it?
Well, let me answer I'll answer the question. I'll give you an example. There was a time when nobody knew who the Federal Reserve was. Nobody. The average schmo, even people beyond the average schmo, had no clue. They didn't even know who
cares?
How many Federal Reserve banks there were, and who the chairman of each reserve, and then the big guy himself. What's his face now? I forget his name. Right?
Oh.
Nobody even knew who these people were. These people used to just operate behind closed marble doors somewhere in Washington or whatever, almost like a think tank, and just basically tinker and, control the money supply and the interest rates, here and there. But for the most part,
been around for over 100 years. So
I get it. But you're not letting me finish. But
Dan, you take forever and a day to make.
For the most part, let the free market and the laws of supply and demand do what they do. Now they don't allow it at all. Now it's total centralization, from what I can tell.
It was centralized 100 years ago.
But not to the level it is now, is what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Well,
they had to
You just didn't know any
establish it.
better. They just didn't know any better.
Right. They had to establish it and ramp it up over time. Now it's fully ramped, in my opinion. It's fully ramped. They've got the preciseness, as this says here, and then we've got the technology. We've got the high-speed computing, the networks, the internet, be able to go to the electronic dollar, etc., and then create money in perpetuity, essentially. Now, what that new paradigm will do to the value of our currency, I don't know. I guess it's yet to be seen. According to the MMT guys, modern monetary theory, they don't think it's a problem. Okay, they tell the Keynesian economics and the Austrian economics, you know, hey, go take a walk on the wall
Listen,
side.
the fact that 80 to 90% of the people think that there's nothing wrong tells me that this system is going to continue indefinitely without any changes.
Yeah, because there's nobody to intercede because the mass are ignorant, to your point.
Unless there's an external influence like a war or somebody who's not getting their piece of the pie blows the whole thing up. That's the only time I see this thing ending.
Yeah, well, it's not going to be the average schmo unless 25 million average schmoes get together. And I don't see that happening. And they already said that earlier in the paper. He already said that earlier in the paper.
I've been listening to a couple of his interviews, and at the end of his life, he was so disappointed with the American citizen. He really was just chastising everybody at the end. He just was like, "You're all a bunch of idiots, and you're going to get exactly what you deserve," is what he was saying.
And you know who was similar to that was the comedian George Carlin when he went out. Yeah. I mean, his last few years of his skits, as you know, I mean, he was just literally ripping the hell out of the public to their face. And they're in the audience laughing. He's calling them dumbbells. It's like, you guys are a bunch of idiots. You're a bunch of morons. You're uneducated. You're dumbed down. And they're all like, oh, that's funny.
Yeah, it's the other guy, George, not me.
Exactly. And nobody seemed to notice.
Well, the bottom line is there are a lot of people who say, well, this is the system. I'm going to play with the system, and I'm going to maximize it for my own gain.
Yeah, because you can't change it. I guess it's like changing, the flow of the Mississippi River, right? Trying to fight it.
If you try to fight this, you will lose. Either they will kill you indirectly or directly, or you will lose all your money.
Either way.
As we found out last year, we're trying to go against the Fed. It's not a smart decision. Once you realize that you're in the ring with Mike Tyson, fall to the ground, count 10, and go home. Because you're not going to win.
Those who get hooked on the economic drug must go to the elite for a fix. In this, the method of introducing large amounts of stabilizing capacitance is by borrowing on the future credit of the world. This is a fourth law of motion, onset, and consists of performing an action and leaving the system before the reflected reaction returns to the point of action, a delayed reaction. The means of surviving the reaction is by changing the system before the reaction can return. By this means, politicians become popular in their own time and the public pays for it later. In fact, the measure of such a politician is the delay of time. The same thing is achieved by a government by printing money beyond the limit of the gross national product, an economic process called inflation. Note, remember that inflation is only the act of printing money in excess of gross national product. They could blame it on the price of widgets or oil only because you never knew the real cause. They could blame it on, as I said earlier, the price of widgets or oil, or because you never knew the real cause, and the only cause of inflation is the printing of more money beyond the gross national product. This puts a large quantity of money into the hands of the public and maintains a balance against their greed, creates a false self-confidence in them, and for a while stays the wolf from the door. They must eventually resort to war to balance the account, because war ultimately is merely the act of destroying the creditor. and the politicians are the publicly hired hitmen that justify the act to keep the responsibility and blood off the public conscience. See section on consent factors and social economic structuring. If the people really cared about their fellow man, they would control their appetites, greed, procreation, etc., so that they would not have to operate on a credit or welfare social system which steals from the worker to satisfy the bum. Excuse me. Since most of the general public will not exercise restraint, there are only two alternatives to reduce the economic inductance of the system. Number one, let the populace bludgeon each other to death in war, which will only result in a total destruction of the living earth. Number two, take control of the world by the use of economic silent weapons in a form of quiet warfare and reduce the economic inductance of the world to a safe level by a process of benevolent slavery and genocide. The latter option has been taken as the obviously better option. At this point, it should be crystal clear to the reader why absolute secrecy about the silent weapons is necessary. The general public refuses to improve its own mentality and its faith in fellow man. It has become a herd of proliferating barbarians and, so to speak, a blight upon the face of the earth. Wow, we know how it's thought about. They do not care enough about economic science to learn why they have not been able to avoid war despite religious morality and their religious or self-gratifying refusal to deal with earthly problems renders the solution of the earthly problem unreachable by them. It is left to those who are truly willing to think and survive as the fittest to survive, to solve the problem for themselves as the few who really care. Otherwise, exposure of the silent weapon would destroy our only hope of preserving the seed of future true humanity. Wow. The household industry, the industries of finance, banking, manufacturing, and government, real counterparts of the pure industries of capital goods and services, are easily defined because they are generally logically structured. Because of this, their processes can be described mathematically and their technical coefficients can be easily deduced. This, however, is not the case with the service industry, known as the household industry. Household models. The problem which a theoretical economist faces is that the consumer preferences of any household is not easily predictable, and the technical coefficients of any one household tend to be nonlinear, very complex and variable function of income, prices, etc. Computer information derived from the use of the universal product code in conjunction with credit card purchase as an individual household identifier could change this state of affairs, but the UPC method is not yet available on a national or even significant regional scale. I guess it is now, though, I thought. To compensate for this data deficiency, an alternative indirect approach of analysis has been adopted, known as economic shock testing. This method, widely used in the aircraft manufacturing industry, develops an aggregate statistical sort of data. Applied to economics, this means that all of the households in one region or in the whole nation are studied as a group or class rather than individually. And the mass behavior rather than individual behavior is used to discover useful estimates of the technical coefficients governing the economic structure of the hypothetical single household industry. One method of evaluating the technical coefficients of the household industry depends upon shocking the prices of a commodity and noting the changes in the sales of all the commodities. Economic shock testing. In recent times, the applications of operation research to the study of the public economy has been obvious for anyone who understands the principles of shock testing. In the shock testing of an aircraft airframe, the recoil impulse of firing a gun mounted on that airframe causes shock waves, and that structure will tell aviation engineers the conditions under which parts of the airplane or the whole airplane or its wings will start to vibrate or flutter, like a guitar string, a flute reed, or a tuning fork, and disintegrate or fall apart in flight. Economic engineers achieve the same result in studying the behavior of the economy and the consumer public by carefully selecting a staple economy, such as beef, coffee, gasoline, or sugar, and then causing a sudden change or shock in its price or availability, thus kicking everybody's budget and buying habits out of shape. Wow. They then observe the shock waves which result by monitoring the changes in advertising, prices, and sales of that and other commodities. The objective of such studies is to acquire the know-how to set the public economy into a predictable state of motion or change, even a controlled self-destructive state of motion, which will convince the public that certain expert people should take control of the money system and reestablish security rather than liberty and justice. Sound familiar? For all. When the subject citizens are rendered unable to control their financial affairs, they, of course, become totally enslaved, a source of cheap labor. Not only the prices of commodities, but also the availability of labor can be used as the means of shock testing. Labor strikes deliver excellent tail shocks to an economy, especially in the critical service areas of trucking / transportation, communication, public utilities, energy, water, garbage collection, etc. By shock testing, it is found that there is a direct relationship between the availability of money flowing in an economy and the psychological outlook and response of masses of people dependent upon that availability. For example, there is a measurable quantitative relationship between the price of gasoline and the probability that a person would experience a headache, feel a need to watch a violent movie, smoke a cigarette, or go to a tavern for a mug of beer. It is most interesting that by observing and measuring the economic modes by which the public tries to run from their problems and escape from reality, and by applying the mathematical theory of operations research, it is possible to program computers to predict the most probable combination of created events, i.e. shocks, which will bring about a complete control and subjugation of the public through a subversion of the public economy by shaking the plum tree. Wow. Manipulation at its finest, brought down to a science. Introduction to economic amplifiers. Economic amplifiers are the active components of economic engineering. The basic characteristics of any amplifier, mechanical, electrical, or economic, is that it receives an input control signal and delivers energy from an independent energy source to a specified output terminal in a predictable relationship to that input control signal. The simplest form of economic amplifier is a device called advertising. If a person is spoken to by a TV advertiser as if he were a 12-year-old, then due to suggestibility, he will, with a certain probability, respond or react to that suggestion with the uncritical response of a 12-year-old and will reach into his economic reservoir and deliver its energy to buy that product on impulse when he passes it in the store. Fascinating. An economic amplifier may have several inputs and outputs. Its response might be instantaneous or delayed. Its circuit symbol might be a rotary switch if its options are exclusive, qualitative, go or no go. Or it might have its parametric input-output relationship specified by a matrix with internal energy sources represented. Whatever its form might be, its purpose is to govern the flow of energy from a source to an output sink in direct relationship to an output control signal. For this reason, it is called an active circuit element or component. Economic amplifiers fall into classes called strategies, and in comparison with electronic amplifiers, the specific internal functions of an economic amplifier are called logistical instead of electrical. Therefore, economic amplifiers not only deliver power gain, but also, in effect, are used to cause changes in the economic circuitry. In the design of an economic amplifier, we must have some idea of at least 5 functions, which are, number 1, the available input signals. Number 2, the desired output control objectives. Number 3, the strategic objective. Number 4, the available economic power sources. And number 5, the logistical options. The process of defining and evaluating these factors and incorporating the economic amplifier into an economic system has been popularly called game theory. Wow. WC emphasis. The design of an economic amplifier begins with a specification of the power level of the output, which can range from personal to national. The second condition is accuracy of response, i.e., how accurately the output action is a function of the input commands. High gain combined with strong feedback helps to deliver the required precision. Everything Dave and I talked about moments ago, and the examples, Dave, you cited with, building circuitries with certain amounts of, electrical tolerance, I suppose, if you will. Most of the error will be in the input data signal. Personal input data tends to be specific, while national input data tends to be statistical. Short list of inputs. Questions to be answered. Number 1, what? Number 2, when? Number 3, where? Number 4, how? Number 5, why? Number 6, who? General sources of information. Number 1, telephone taps. Number 2, surveillance. Number 3, analysis of garbage. Number 4, behavior of children in school. Wow, all apropos. Standard of living by, number 1, food. Number 2, clothing. Number 3, shelter. Number 4, transportation. Social contacts. Number 1, telephone, itemized record of calls. Number 2, family, marriage certificates, birth certificates, etc., friends, associates, etc. Number 4, memberships in organizations. Number 5, political affiliation. Does this strike a bell to anybody? Is anybody noticing something? Didn't the former USSR do stuff like this? The personal paper trail.
Well, today people gladly give their information away for free when they join Facebook.
Yeah, no, I get that, yeah. Is it any wonder why the Facebooks of the world, the Googles of the world, the Amazons of the world, in which you have a computer in your hand, which is also a GPS system, which has voice, video, and data and tracks your every move, both from an input and output perspective, and then they in turn take that information and store it somewhere in the cloud, and then it's called big data, and then they chug on it in the background, and they make statistical inferences from it? Not at all. And you wonder how we got here. And those same people won't let their own children use the devices that they've designed for ours. Geez, I wonder why. The personal paper trail, personal buying habits, i.e. personal computer preferences. All right, number 1, checking accounts. Number 2, credit card purchases. Number 3, tagged credit card purchases. The credit card purchase of products bearing the UPC or Universal Product Code. Assets, checking accounts, savings accounts, real estate, business, automobile, safety deposit at bank, stock market. Liabilities, editors, enemies, see legal, loans, consumer credit. Government sources or ploys, welfare, Social Security, USDA, surplus food, doles, grants, subsidies. Principles of this ploy: the citizen will almost always make the collection of information easy if he can operate on the free sandwich principle of eat now and pay later. Government sources via intimidation, the Internal Revenue Service.
We need to read these things because
OSHA, census, etc.
I don't think we need to read this. I don't see this as really being relevant to you.
Well, it is relevant.
Okay.
It's just, do we need to literally read lists to people? What is he saying here, folks? Besides us reading all these lists, right? These are all the things.
I'll scroll through them there, and people can read it on their own if they want.
But the bottom line is, these are all the inputs for the machine to cause the desired outputs and tweaking of responses. That's the point. That's all you need to know without reading every detail. But as you can see here, these are highly, highly controlled, characteristics and details and actually inputs, let's say from a computer perspective, right? For the desired outcomes. You can see their methodology here. It's very stringent, very rigid, and is very precise and very detailed. And they've had a lot of time to perfect this, to figure out what they need to gather, how to store it, how to manipulate the data, and then ultimately get the desired come.
Yeah, we'll pick it up here next time. Short list of outputs. We'll pick it up.
Yeah, that's fine.
Because it's, I thought this is where it ended, but.
Yeah. Yeah. But suffice to say, these lists are amazing.
Well, it's like any design, like we were talking about before. If you want a computer program to give you an accurate answer or prediction, then the inputs have to be accurate, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
Garbage in, garbage out, as the old saying goes.
So you put in good inputs, you get good outputs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with us as a society. You know, you dumb down your people, well, you get dumb citizens, like George Carlin says. Like he says about the politicians, if you get selfish, egotistical, you know, worst of the worst, well, it's
Controlling
just a
and
reflection of your
maniacal.
society.
Couldn't agree more. They had to come from somewhere. They came from us. They came from the families, right? They didn't come from the, you know, Mars.
Well, the thing that I have been saying for a while is the problem is it's all, whether it's you use the Wizard of Oz, I use it as to judge people's actions, is we have a country of people that are able to say, do as I say, not as I do. We do not have a country of rule of law. Those at the upper echelon are able to do whatever they want and they get rewarded for it. And if they get in a jam, they get bailed out. Everybody else, too bad, so sad.
And that's a function of the centralization that's taken over. I liken it to, you know, either the CCP or the former Soviet Union, where it was total centralized communist control.
Today,
And those
people,
and those that were the closest to the center were the ones that ultimately were picked as the winners, or that could be bailed out. Those were not closest to the center or on the periphery, if you will, or the average guy not in the inner circle. You don't have a chance. Don't have a chance. Isn't it interesting how we've devalued our money so much where, Dave, up until about 20 years ago or 30 years ago or so, where people like my folks, for example, with just a high school education could retire and have a decent retirement. Basically, there was a time in this country, and it wasn't that long ago, where if you had about $1 million saved by the time you reach retirement, you were all set because you could count on the 6%, 7%, or 60.
30 years ago.
Yeah, you could count on 7% interest and live off of.
And that was a safe. And that was a safe return.
That was a safe return.
If you took all the safe decisions with no risk, you got a 6 to 8% return on your money.
100%. So if you had $1 million at retirement, and you were short 6 or 7%, there's 70 G's a year right there on top of your Social Security and whatever else. You were fine. That's not the case anymore because of devaluation of money. You can't. How many people even have $1 million to retire on? Even if they do, they're not getting 7%. They're getting 0, unless they go into speculation or they go into the market, you know, seeking these returns. So basically, to get that same 70,000 a year, I mean, you need to have 10 million now in the bank. Right?
Well, how are all these pension funds making their 7-8% they need to fund current retirees?
Yeah, they're not.
Somehow.
Well, what they're doing is, you know, the days of wherever they were putting the money to get the guaranteed 6% are no longer there. So I guess what they're doing is they're going into more speculative stuff, probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're shoving it into tech stocks and God knows what else, right? That's what I'm guessing.
Yep. Goldman Sachs comes to them, says, hey, I have this derivative.
Yeah.
Risk-free.
Yeah.
Pay you 10%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's what's happening.
Sounds familiar. That's what happened
we,
back
yeah,
in
we've all been
2008.
right. We've all been corralled. We've all been corralled like cattle now, and hoarded into at least a few of us that can into the stock market. And for those that can't, I mean, what is it? 1/3 of Americans or 1/4 don't even have checking accounts. So they're already toasted with this
Well,
devaluation going on.
I don't know. Maybe they've got their money into hard assets.
I doubt it. I doubt it. Most Americans, as you know, live paycheck to paycheck, not to be disparaging. They
Yeah.
can't go more than 2 or 3 weeks. It's a joke when you hear the financial professionals say, well, you're supposed to have 6 months of, emergency funds. That's true. Are you
Well, you know
kidding
how
me?
you're in a quote unquote working class town is you'll see a lot of those payday loan places.
Yes. Good point.
Manchester's got a lot of those.
Good point.
And
Yeah.
you want to talk about a bad cycle to get caught up in.
Oh my God.
You
What
can't
is it?
get out of it
30%
once you're in
interest?
it.
30% interest or something? Usury level.
The problem is it kind of reminds me of the people who used to work on the plantations, and they weren't even paid in cash. They were paid in like whatever the ticket of the day was, and you had to spend it at the company store.
At the company store.
And they made sure that you were always owing them money, so you could never leave.
Yeah, you can never leave. Constant indentured servitude.
Check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
But you can never leave, as the old Eagle song says.
Yep. Welcome to the Hotel California.
We're just in a different form of indentured servitude. The problem is very few of us realize it, like you and I realize it. Not much we can do. We realize it, but the bulk don't. They don't understand.
There is something you can do. There is something you can do. You have to make some very uncomfortable choices.
Well, what I mean is, I guess what I meant is, it's not like we can change the system. That's what I mean. But to your point,
So speaking of which, Dan, so I'm curious.
At a personal level.
Have you listed your house?
No.
There you go. And you won't.
Well, I had a guy over Wednesday.
You won't.
I don't know. It's not as easy for me as it is for you. I have a lot more variables, unfortunately, or factors, whatnot.
Well, because you choose to let it be that way.
Well, there's truth to that.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Of course it is. I've told you that before. You look at it as you're like, hey man, I don't have to do anything because I have these excuses.
I don't look at it that way.
So when I fail, I can say, I had no other choice. I had to ride this out. I couldn't make any moves.
Yeah.
Hey man, that's all right. You stay on the Titanic. I'll be waving to you from the lifeboat. Bye, Dan. Good luck.
Hopefully not.
Well, I don't know what you're seeing. I mean,
yeah.
So yeah, who knows? Who the knows what's going to happen? I certainly don't. But I can tell you, I can only make my best guess. But either way, you know what? The whole point is, I think this system sucks. I really do. And it's one reason why I stopped paying taxes years ago is because I didn't want to fund these wars. Okay? I didn't want to fund these wars.
I hear you. The war fighters. I love that term, the war fighters. It just connotes industrial complex, doesn't it? It just connotes it.
Well, it's very easy. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was out for a walk tonight, and all these, bunch of these people on the walk I went down by the river, they have their American flags in the lawn outside, and I'm like, rah, 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 rah.
Yeah, well, I'm seeing people all around town now too, getting out on the streets and the side of the highway, waving the flag and the Trump flags and all that.
Sorry, Trump had his chance. I don't care what the reason is. He has. I don't believe. I don't believe he is the solution. I don't believe any one person is the solution. I think the thing is going to fall apart.
Yeah, there's no one person.
And I'm not sure what that means. Listen, Plato has already predicted what's coming. The five regimes. The five regimes is a famous book. Mm-hmm. And after this type of government, it goes into a tyranny. And the bottom line is, you can see it already. People will gladly give up their liberty for security. So this is going to get so bad, Dan.
Yeah.
It's going to get so bad where maybe some people can't even feed themselves, or they have no security of any kind, or there'll be gangs threatening their livelihoods or their lives. And they'll be like, please protect us, protect us. Okay. Freedom is the most terrifying form, because there's nobody protecting you but yourself and your group. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I could see Donald Trump becoming the dictator.
Really?
Good. You don't think he would be a dictator?
Well, he's definitely has that potential mindset. Yeah, I mean, he's an egomaniac for one, and a lot of them are narcissistic and egomaniacs, right?
He'll be calling himself Nero.
Yeah, I mean,
Emperor Trump.
He definitely has some classic tendencies towards that, I think, Thinks he's greater than he is. The awesome one. He has those propensities, I think. I would like to think he won't do that.
It came down to Clinton versus Trump. So, I mean, if we're given those two choices, I mean, and now we've got Trump Biden. Come on, man.
Trump Biden. Yeah, Biden. I mean, talk about a washed up. I mean, when are these people, these rejects, these retreads going to go away? I hate to be derogatory, but he's 80 years old. It's like, dude, you had your time in the sun. You're done. Go away.
Look at our Congress. Our Congress is full of these zeros as well.
Exactly. It's like, guys, you've been there for 40 years. Go away. It's not supposed to be a career path like that, but you made it. You're a multimillionaire. You're a multimillionaire. You got the inside track. You got the inside information. We know this, at least those of us that have half a friggin' brain. We know this. So go away now. The same thing with Hillary. She just won't go away. She's like a nightmare. They keep coming back. It's like, go away. You're done. We don't want to deal with you anymore. We need some new blood, fresh ideas. And the best that the Democratic Party can produce is an 80-year-old Joe Biden that calls the state of Arizona a city. That's the best they can produce. You know what I mean?
Yep. Either the Democrats want Kamala to be president, and that's what they're setting up, or there's somebody who hasn't surfaced yet.
Yeah, that too. I guess so, yeah. I mean, he's the best that they can produce. I mean, it's a joke. It's beyond obscene. God knows what the rest of the world is thinking. They got to be watching us closely. We're supposed to be the leaders of the world, and this is what we bring to the surface to be president and leader of the free world.
Well, that's how messed up the rest of the world must be if they think that the United States is leading anything now.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, why is it in many things we can admit when a guy or gal, whatever, so to speak, gets too old? Sports is the best analogy. You reach a point where you get over the hill. It's just the way it is. It's the same thing in leadership and in politics. I hate to say it. You reach a certain age where you don't have the energy levels anymore. You don't quite have, and this is going to sound mean or whatever, but you don't have the mental acuity. I'm sorry. All right. It's like a young, great athlete that was 25 or 30. You're a stud at that age. You can do no wrong. Okay. you're Hercules. But when you're 45, 55, 60, it's not the same. That's when you're going to hang it up. It's just the nature of things. It's the same thing mentally. I hate to say it. We can admit it in sports, but heaven forbid we admit it otherwise. You're going to tell me, Joe, I'm not trying to be derogatory, he has the same mental acuity he had when he was 50, 40, and 30? I don't think so.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think the United States is a melting pot? Do you think being a melting pot is a beneficial thing or a negative thing?
It all depends on who's answering the question and what your point of view is. I mean, if I'm Adolf Hitler, if I'm Adolf...
I'm asking just in a general overview. Is it a positive thing or is it a negative thing? Okay, you can't answer. I'll answer it. It's a positive thing. Okay,
Okay,
because
I was about to answer it, but that's fine.
Okay. So
I mean,
the point I'm making is it's the same thing. Is the founding fathers didn't stay around until they died. They basically all went home. Okay, they didn't stay there for 6 terms, 7 terms. They didn't stay there until
right.
they were dragged out.
They wanted to do a term or two and then leave and go home back to the farm or whatever. They're like, get me out of here.
Then they expected normal people to come in,
right,
do their duty like jury duty, and then go back home.
Exactly.
That's what we need today. Is we have to rotate these professional politicians out. Get rid of them. Get rid of these lawyers. Get rid of these lobbyists. Get rid of these people with agendas. If we don't do that, we have 0 chance of getting this country back.
I totally agree. But the argument is, though, that, you have terms, you have term limits.
Well, it's proven that incumbents win 90% of the time, I believe, because they have access to money and power that, a challenger doesn't have.
Okay, so here's where I'm going with this. And I've said this for years. Yes, you do have term limits. But the problem is, you got a guy like Ted Kennedy or Robert Byrd or whatever. Not
only for president.
Not term limit. In other words, if you're a senator or a representative, you can just keep running if you keep winning, right?
Yeah, you can go 100 years if you live that long.
Exactly. So I've said this for years. I think a senator should have a 2-term limit, 12 years. I think a representative that serves 2 years, give him 3 terms, maybe something like that, 4. So taking a senator, for example, if you limit him to 2 terms, that's 12 years. Okay. I'll give you, the first term is going to take you a couple of years to get up and running. I get that. It's going to take a year or 2 to get to know the ropes, get to know Washington, make contacts, know who's who, figure out who you need to talk to across the aisle. That takes time. That's why 2 terms.
If you can't, that long, dude.
Okay, but bear with me. I'm just saying, let's say 2 terms for argument's sake.
You get rid of all lobbying and money in politics, and now it truly comes down to the actual politicians. They don't have to defer to Dow Corning to tell them how to vote.
Well, yeah. And the other thing is, if it's just 2 terms, for example, taking a senator again for 12 years, that's more than enough time to get stuff done. On the other hand, it's not the point where the guy's in there 35 years either. That's it. 2 terms, you're done. If you win both elections, that's great. You're awesome. But after the second,
typically don't write legislation. Usually that comes from the House.
Okay. Right.
Congressmen are the ones who usually write the legislation.
Right. And the senator's got to just basically review it for 2/3 approval, right? I think it is.
I don't think it requires.
But the point is, I agree with you. We've got lifetime politicians. It's a friggin' career track. It's a career track. Oh yeah, get elected. You can stay there 30 years, get great benefits. You can constantly vote for better health care year after year because
not only that, you're collecting the benefits on the side that they don't report. You think Nancy 100%. Pelosi and all these other politicians made that money honestly?
No. Yeah, and then they have speaking engagements and everything else at $50,000 a pop because they've got so much to say. And they've got all the inside track information.
Yeah, that's how Hillary and Bill Clinton got paid off.
Yeah.
with bribes. They hire
Yeah.
them at $250,000 a speaking engagement.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what appears to be a legitimate reason to hire them is a payoff. That's how you can launder money pretty easily. But this country's, I'm telling you, people just aren't paying attention. They don't want to be bothered with this.
No, they don't.
I'll bet you as many people are interested in what we just described in the last 5 minutes as understand the whole thing about capacitance, inductors, and resistance. We truly have a society of morons. What do most people do, Dan?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't propose to be a genius, but I do try to think of things and I do try to understand things in deep thought, even stuff like this. So I'll just speak for myself, and I know you do too. But I think most people don't do this. Like what you and I are
Our
doing.
system's not really set up for us to really be involved in the process. We write letters and then we get a form letter back saying, thank you for your interest.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean the average day-to-day citizen is just so far removed. Even if you and I didn't want to be removed and we wanted to get in closer, so to speak, I mean, how do you really do it? I guess you can go visit your congressman, right?
Yeah, see how long they'll actually, the first time they might be like, oh, thank you. It's like when I asked that guy who's my local congressman the tough questions, and he ignored my question and wrote back to me saying, hey, I need your support on this bill. And he didn't even address what I wrote him about. Real puke.
Well, because in reality, making an excuse for him, he doesn't have time. He's only got 2 years, right? So they're constantly having to campaign and stuff, Dave, and push stuff through. He doesn't have time to sit down.
That's what we should write. Yeah, that's what we should write a constitutional amendment on is maybe go to one term with all of these things. One and done.
Well,
that's what they do in Mexico.
Well, yeah. Well, that's a good point. Maybe one or done, or a representative should maybe have 4 years so that, because the problem is with 2 years, after 6 months, you're already thinking of re-election. You have to start planning for it. Well, so instead of doing the people's work, you're busy campaigning for funds and stuff.
If you had one term, you wouldn't have to worry about wasting any time on campaigning.
That's true. So maybe you make one term 4 years and that's it. You give them 4 years or 3 years. Give the reps 3 years, keep a senator at 6 years, and you're out, guys. That's it. We need legislation like that. Good luck trying to pass it. But to kill the career paths and to kill the power brokers and stuff, that's what you'd have to do. Now,
well, think about it now. It would now become once again, it would actually become a service to your country.
100%.
Because now it would be an inconvenience to actually take those 3 years or 6 years out of your life, stop what you're doing with your life and go down there. It would not be a career path.
Well, especially let's say you're 30-year-old hotshot lawyer or a 33-year-old Wall Street stud and you're making $1 million a year, beaucoup dollars. Now, if you decide to interrupt that for 2 years or 6 years, and it would be interrupting that path to then become essentially a public servant, right? Where you couldn't really, for the rest of your life, carve out a career path and 30-year power base. You know what I'm saying? Then it would be, to your point, an interruption. Absolutely. Yeah. And then how many of those people would even do it then at that point?
Yep. All these people you see on the news get interviewed, they would all be gone at some point. Rand Paul, John McCain, Lindsey Graham,
100%.
Nancy Pelosi,
all of them.
Chuck Schumer, those idiots from California.
Chucky Schumer. Or the guy from Vermont, what's his face, Bernie. I'm going to give you free everything.
Yeah, Bernie
free healthcare.
Have to get a job with somebody.
Free college. Free toilet paper.
When's the last time Bernie had a job outside the public system? where he wasn't sucking,
1968.
where he wasn't sucking on the public tit.
1968 Ashbury Fair, or the Woodstock '69, when he was
Popcorn peanuts.
when he was
Popcorn peanuts. LSD sticks.
when he was wigging out, listening to Purple Haze.
Well, seriously, do you see any other way but radical, drastic changes like that? We're not
No,
going
I
to deal with
don't.
these current jokers.
No, I don't, but it's not going to happen, because trying to get people off the couch and put down the Doritos and everything else. And then the power brokers that are already there, dude, they're not going to give that up. Are you shitting me? They're going to fight you tooth and nail. You kidding me? They'll send in the Marines if they have to.
They would gladly bring the whole system down rather than give in to that, like they've done multiple times before.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No doubt about it. Yeah. No, there'd have to be a revolution, literally.
Well, it's going to have to go that. Nobody believes that this country is going to morph into what the Soviet Union was, or Czechoslovakia was, or Poland. Nobody believes that.
If you study history, it's entirely possible. That's just one man's opinion.
Entirely likely.
I'm not going to say likely, but it's entirely possible.
No, it's entirely likely.
I'd like to think that won't happen. I'd like to think there are factions that would stop it, but probably not. History has shown otherwise, right? Unless we somehow overcome history. We seem to think
those factions will just get an early death. That's all.
Yeah.
I mean, there may be pockets of resistance, etc., but eventually because the problem is I don't think people, we've talked about this. There's nobody who is going to be able to organize all these people to focus on a certain task. It's going to be a shotgun blast, and they'll do exactly what they've done all along. They'll put one faction against another, and they'll be so busy fighting amongst themselves, nothing will get done.
Yeah. Yeah, which is, you see it now. You see it now. You see all the pencil necks outside, protesting stuff and getting violent and angry and burning buildings. And it's like, well, what are you doing? What is your objective? What are you trying to achieve? What is the end game? Have you thought this out? Besides knocking the car over and throwing stink bombs at the cops? I mean, what are you doing?
They're just angry.
What is Antifa doing? What is Black Lives Matter doing? I mean, what is their end game? I don't understand it. I'm not criticizing it. I just don't understand what they're doing. I know there's a lot of violence going on. I know there was a lady in Indiana that made a comment that BLM didn't like, and they pulled her out of the car, beat the hell out of her, and shot her. I mean, what's up with that? That's America? Really? Or was that a third world nation somewhere run by some junta general? I mean, this is serious stuff, guys. But nobody seems to notice. They're just worried about, Cam Newton winning last weekend. Tom Brady lost. Yay. They know more about that. I don't know. I don't have an answer.
Well, I have an answer, but I know it's not going to be an accepted answer.
Well, I do too.
People don't move out of the way. I mean, the bottom line is, like we talked about, like you've told me probably 100 times now, that you do believe certain things are coming down the road, but you still don't get out of the way. Okay? So how you're going to expect people who never even contemplated these things to even consider that there's a problem?
No, not at all. Not at all.
That's why I said 10 years ago to you, and I said 5 years ago to you, and I said every interview we do, the only thing that you can do right now, folks, is vote with your feet. And I know that sucks, I know it's not what we want, but life doesn't give us what we want, as the Rolling Stones say. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want.
Well, I got to go, but hence the Deagle site, I guess.
Always get what you want.
I mean, that's what's going to take us from 325 to 100 million, I guess. Riots and leaving is what you're telling me.
Well, it could be.
And vaccines.
Now, I'm not.
And wars.
I think I am right, but I'm not saying that it's 100% guaranteed. We are the Titanic. That's all you have to remember. The ship has already been mortally wounded. Nobody notices it. So if you notice it, if you have any conviction, like on any of these trades that I've turned you on to, and I'm like, Dan, do this. And a lot of the trades, you're like, oh, I'm too scared. I don't want to do that. And then, a lot of them end up being winners, and some of them you do. Okay? The bottom line is only you can decide what you're going to take action on.
Right.
But this is a serious issue. And it's like, I don't know if you were involved in this discussion or who I was talking to, if I was talking to myself in the last video, is the bottom line is if you give yourself a day to get everything done, you're not going to make it. Okay? Superman couldn't get everything done in a day. But, if this thing is in the process of happening, well, you still have time to divest. You still have time to make a plan with your family and your loved ones and decide what action plan you're going to put into motion. If you have certain assets like a house, you can get rid of that now. And as a bonus, house prices are booming.
I know.
But where am I going to live? Wrong question. That's what an asshole asks. You take care of step 1, then you go to step 2, then you go to step 3. You don't go to step 3 before you get done with step 1. Remove head from orifice.
Yeah. No,
but
hopefully.
if you don't have the intestinal fortitude to make those decisions, then you get whatever you are given. And as Bill Cooper likes to say, it's not going to be what you want. You can't always get what you want.
Well, what you're saying is some people can do that, like you.
Everybody can do it.
You think of the bulk of the population can do that? I don't think so, for various reasons.
100% they can do it, Dan. It just means that you have to rearrange your priorities. You could do it. Absolutely, you could do it. I've laid out 3 different plans for you to do it.
We're not talking about me. I'm saying in general.
Give me an example of somebody.
What you're prescribing in general is for 1/3 or 2/3 of the fucking U.S. just to walk out and walk across the border. That's basically what you're saying. Just walk right out. That's what you're saying. Half of us just walk.
If you are in a game and you find out...
This isn't a game. This isn't a game.
Listen to me. Listen to me.
I have listened to you.
Then shut
I have realistic. You've been doing all the talking.
If you were in a game and you said that the game is rigged, are you going to continue playing?
It's rigged everywhere. It's rigged everywhere. So now you got to figure out where is it less rigged. Because it's rigged everywhere. Wherever there's a government, it's rigged. There is no utopia. That's my answer.
And
Now,
you said there was a utopia.
there might be some better places. I will agree with you there. There might be some better places, but for a lot of people, dude, what you're suggesting is the bulk of the rank and file just walk out. It's not going to happen.
No,
It's
I'm
not going
not
to
saying, no,
happen.
I'm not saying, because I know the bulk of the people aren't going to do anything. Bulk of the people are going to be lining up to get the shot.
Yes, that I
Okay.
agree with. I won't be one of
No,
them,
I'm
but
not
yeah,
talking about them. I'm talking about the people who see that they are in a paradigm that they have no control over. The bottom
right.
line is the people who see that, yes, you are probably going to have to go to someplace very rural in the United States where you can get off the grid and off the map, or you're going to have to find someplace in another country that is rural and outside the box.
Mhm.
Where the nice thing about being an expat is that you are not tracked the same way as you are as a citizen.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
Depending which country you go to.
exactly.
Like in Mexico, they typically like let you do whatever you want down there,
Yeah,
and you know they don't like you're not going around murdering people, but you form your own thing, and they're like, okay, hello, yes, thank you for coming down and spending your money. That's all they care about.
mm. Yeah. As long as you're not hurting people and breaking laws, yeah.
But there are countless people from the United States who are going to various Latin and South American countries, going to Canada. So a lot of them are going to Europe. Some are
That's
even
true.
going into Asia. They're going everywhere.
They
There are
are.
probably multi-millions of Americans now living outside the United States because they're like, I can't play in this system. I'm sorry. I just can't do it.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I was reading an article. I told you about it 4 weeks ago about a lot of African Americans. A fair amount have been moving back to where their ancestors were from, those countries, some of them.
Well, that's not getting any publicity at all.
It's happening, though. Some of them are doing it, yeah. They're like, you know what, I'm treated better there. There's no racism, blah, blah, blah. All the bullshit. Some of them have moved to Europe, and they said they're even treated differently in Europe, you know?
Well,
This is what these people have said. Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of issues, especially, the bullshit racism. It's like, when are we going to get over it, folks? We're all Americans. It's like, really? Who cares about color of someone's skin? I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
well, I don't really. I never think about that
I don't either, but
because
apparently somebody does.
I think that MLK had the best answer on that, and judge somebody by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Okay,
Totally.
all right.
Based on their
And
own.
I think that most people, I think most people are going to have some apprehension when they meet people who are different than them. They're going to be like, oh my God, am I going to get along with them? Or are they going to judge me? Or will I do the wrong thing? So there's some fear and apprehension and trepidation there. But I think once people start working together and get to know each other, I think the skin color goes away or the culture, um, well, I won't say the culture because the culture is more of an issue than the skin color
Yeah.
because that comes to how you want to live your life and what you think is valuable and what's not valuable.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, that's all part of it.
no, I think this is one of the things, Dan, which is actually quite simple. Actually, I think the more time you put into thinking about this, you're just spinning your wheels. I think it's very simple. It's one of these things where it's like a universal truth. You know the answer or you don't. And if you know the answer, you know you need to take action. And if you don't, then it's 100% on you. You get exactly what you're going to deserve. So those people who decided to get on the train, to go along, to get along, well, guess what? They got exactly what they deserved because they just got on the train.
Exactly.
So, and anybody who participates in the system, and here's the thing is, yeah, I mean, I'm playing a dangerous game myself because I'm in these markets and I think about this because I really don't want to be there. I really don't. But it's like, I'm a corralled monkey as well. And I ask myself frequently, at what point do I just pull and go?
Exactly.
So, but, you know, I started divesting years ago, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first step is get rid of all your stuff. And all of a sudden it's not such a daunting task when you get rid of all your stuff that you don't really need. But I wonder how many people can live without just a TV. All right, pal.
Right.
Well, have a good night.
Okay.
Talk to you Sunday.
Okay.
Cheers.
See ya. Good night.